everyone, and welcome to Rebooting Season 3. Today's guest is a legendary cybersecurity professional and one of my personal role models that I've had for years. He is the founder of TrustedSec, DerbyCon, and he also created the Social Engineer Toolkit. He's an author and he is a fitness inspiration to us all, I think. Welcome, Dave Kennedy.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great. Do you just want to do your really quick shout out to the Brits? Because I know the British audience is going to really enjoy what you have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, I have a lot of friends over there, a lot of employees over there as well, and I'm a huge Doctor Who fan. In fact, I got my sonic screwdriver back here that's signed by Matt Smith, who's my favorite Doctor, and I actually have a full-size TARDIS in my house. So it's in my basement, and it goes into a different room, so it's bigger on the inside. So it's
Wow.
yeah.
How did you get your wife to agree to let you build a full-size
right
house?
See, marriage is all about working together, right? So she basically got to design the entire house, and I got my TARDIS. That's how that works. So she got whatever she wanted in the house, and I got the TARDIS, which is I'm happy with.
I think she got a good deal out of that as well, though. To be fair,
right?
So
Yeah, see,
she got the whole house.
Exactly. We work together. I got my TARDIS. That's all that matters.
So speaking of your family, how do you think your family would describe what you do for a living?
I think they would call me a cyber. Well, I think my wife would say I'm a cybersecurity expert, but I think my kids would say I'm a very good ethical computer hacker. Would be what they would explain to me, or what they've explained to their teachers as. It's funny because when they first go into school, they ask you like, well, what do your parents do for a living? And of course, my one son, my youngest son, Mason's like, he's a computer hacker and he hacks into computers all day. I'm like, Mason, you gotta provide context to that, man, because a lot of people don't understand that. Hey, there's a lot of good folks out there trying to protect. And now, and all of a sudden, our teacher thinks that I'm some organized crime group hacking into computer systems. But I think we've worked that out with them. So
yeah, in Chris Hadnagy's episode, he said that his daughter once said that he was a bank robber, and then when the teacher questioned her further, she said, "Yeah, no, he's robbing a bank right now as we speak." So I think it's kind of one of those unique things, isn't it?
Such a great job, right?
It is a great job. And speaking of hacking, I mean, one of the things that I really want to talk about today is I saw this post on LinkedIn, which kind of sparked me thinking about this. And I thought, you know what, you'd be a perfect person to talk about this. I saw a post on LinkedIn that called supply chains an untamable beast, something that we're never going to get control of in the cybersecurity sphere. And they're always going to provide such effective ways to attack the sort of real target. So I just kind of wanted to get your general gist, and I know we're going to dive into some more specific examples later on, but just your general gist of why you think it is that supply chain attacks are so effective.
Yeah, supply chain attacks are probably one of the most damaging types of attacks that we see, because it really takes advantage of the trust relationships that we have with our partners. And you look at what we're doing now with the whole cloud movement. A lot of organizations are moving to Office 365 and Azure AD and AWS or Salesforce or other things that are out there, right? As a main mechanism to be able to do your business. We have software that is installed on all of our systems. We use Microsoft operating systems. We use Linux. We use Apple. Our phones have different operating systems. You have Android. You have iOS. And so all of these different complexities you have are third-party companies that develop software or hardware that we trust. Whenever you see an update hit your phone, do you instantly think, oh, I wonder if this update's okay, or has it been hacked by a hacker to push a backdoor into my system? Well, most people don't think that. They just they update their systems because it's coming from Apple, it's coming from Google, and we trust those specific types of updates. And so when these supply chain attacks happen, it's really a crux of the security controls at that organization failing, right? And I'm not saying that it's wrong. It's just that hackers have figured out a way to compromise the organization in some way, shape, or form, and then they use the trust that you have with that third party to further compromise. And this could be a managed service provider. This could be a cloud provider. It could be software development companies. And that trust factor is huge, because you trust that your partner is going to be secure and that they don't have a major data breach on their hands. And so why supply chain attacks are so hard to detect and so hard to protect against is because our models look outward in. We look at, hey, what is an attacker going to do against our organization? Is an attacker going to hack us through our endpoints or through a user? Are they going to hack us through our websites and into our environment? And how do we protect against that? we don't look at it from an inside out perspective and say, well, what can happen if one of our systems are actually compromised from a third party trusted perspective? What level of damage does that have to our infrastructure and organization? And that's what we're seeing with these supply chain attacks. And what's interesting is that, I'm sure we'll get down to the specifics of these, but you look at SolarWinds, for example, and this had such a high level of success with a lot of big companies that tout,
Right.
being leaders in security, that everybody else is looking at this now. Ransomware groups are looking at this. Other nation states are looking at this and saying this is very opportunistic for us. We can use these types of attacks to get a much better foothold into organizations that we need to target, or to go encrypt for ransomware to get more money back from these types of companies. So this isn't a one and done type of attack. These supply chain attacks are going to be really the next wave of fronts of attacks that we see coming from our trusted third parties, and having access not just to one system, but to thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers now that they wouldn't necessarily have in the first place. So it's a big problem, and one that we're not designed from a security perspective and our threat models to really push forward and try to protect against right now.
Right. And I think Blackboard was a really beautiful example of this, wasn't it? Because the Blackboard incident, I can't remember how many organizations in the UK, but a lot of them were universities, and they were charities, and they were organizations that, really had to put their trust somewhere, did, and then it all sort of blew up in their face, essentially. And I think Shopify, that was the other one. I think Shopify was another one that had the same incident, wasn't it? And it's like this central point that lots of other companies link into and use to provide services and to store their data. And you sort of have access into all of those and all of their data as well, which is, in some respects, from a return on investment perspective, it's a really wise move, right?
Yep.
Because why go after all of them when you can go after one thing? If you Google supply chain cyber attack, and this is quite interesting, the one name that comes up time and time and time again is Target. So the interesting thing I found with the Target situation was the amount of sort of OSINT that was available, both from Microsoft, from on their website, where I think they used Target as a case study for part of one of their virtualization tools or something. And then again on Target's own website, where they cited how they sort of onboarded people and interacted with their supply chain, which was all really sort of open and transparent on their website. And I found that was really, really interesting. So what do you think was the main lesson that we should have learned, at least from the Target attack?
Target's an interesting one. What happened when Target actually kickstarted the security movement in the retail space, because it was so vast and large, where you look at the point of sale systems that were being used at the time, and what would happen is when you'd swipe your credit card or insert via EMV, that data was then essentially decrypted, sent in a decrypted form from that point of sale system to a backend server that would eventually encrypt it. And so there was a weak point in there where the attackers could comb and harvest a substantial amount of data, credit card numbers, because of that specific weakness. Now, almost every retailer that I know of has upgraded their system since then because of Target or Home Depot or Jimmy John's, or a lot of the other breaches that we saw around those periods of time. I think Kmart's in there as well. And they focused on point of sale systems that encrypt right at the device itself, hardware-based encryption. So when you're swiping your card or inserting your card, they automatically encrypt right there as it occurs and sends that data back encrypted. So there's no injection point that an attacker can use. Now, the initial entry point, though, is the one that really was one of the first of its kind supply chain attacks, right, against commercial private sector industries. And that one took advantage of a third-party HVAC company that they were using to do their to automatic adjustments of their store locations and things of that effect. And that third party had unprecedented access to that environment, and so the third party got compromised, and all of a sudden now you had access to Target as a whole. And that really showed, hey, third party companies really are a major conduit or avenue for attack. But everybody focused very heavily on the credit card part of it. They didn't focus on the third party HVAC company as a component of that. So when you think of Target and you think of, oh, all those credit cards got compromised, you don't think of, well, hey, it was actually a third party that led to that ultimate compromise in the first place. And so I think with a lot of the latest things that we're seeing out there, I think the focus is now shifting. Like, how do we protect against these third-party attacks out there. But that discussion really never happened at Target. So it's good timing now. At least we're finally talking about it. And I think security industry's been talking about it for a long time, saying, hey, third parties are a major area, and we have to have third-party vendor risk management programs, and we need to look at what companies are doing to secure our data, those types of things. That's always been there, but our threat models have never been there to really say, well, if one of our third parties gets compromised, what can we do to protect against it? And that's the new discussion I think that's happening now.
And I think you said something a little interesting there. Well, very interesting. But one thing that sort of resonated with me, you said that the Target attack really triggered change in the retail industry. And my question is, do you think that change was triggered just in the United States, just in the retail sector? Do you think it sort of spread further than that? Do you think it went into Europe and Japan and Australia? Because I sort of tend to feel that we see a big attack, we see something happen, and we think, wow, this is going to be a massive catalyst for change worldwide. But it ends up being just that industry in just that country, as opposed to spreading everywhere.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Whenever we see these massive data breaches, you're like, okay, everybody's aware of it now. We're going to do something. But then, like, the next thing happens on the news, and all of a sudden now there's no longer any information about this hack. Like, you can't find anything on SolarWinds right now, even though it's one of the largest hacks that's happened in our lifetime. And so you're absolutely right in that sense. I think with Target, it was a little bit different because the credit cards are owned by a very select few amount of payment merchants, across the globe. So the payment processors and the payment merchants were all very concerned about this and the amount of damage that occurred, both from a brand and reputational perspective, but also for the monetary value of reissuing credit cards and things of that effect. So I think that had a global change because it impacted the bottom line of a pretty tight-knit group of folks that was able to do that. But that's a one select case of all of the other hundreds or thousands of data breaches that we've seen over the past several years that haven't spawned any type of change whatsoever. And so I think people have become very desensitized, I think, to data breaches. I think they expect it as part of their daily lives, when we really shouldn't be settling for that, right? We shouldn't be settling for, hey, there's going to be a data breach and my information is going to be stolen. When I do I'll do presentations for schools or like businesses, and they're more high level ones, ones talking about how do you do your own personal security. And the thing that I get from discussions afterwards is, well, I just assume that my stuff is already compromised and my stuff is going to be compromised more, so just so I just I stash gold bars underneath my bed instead. I'm like, well, okay, that's weird. I don't use a bank, I use gold bars. Okay, well, I don't know how you sell gold, but I don't think our level of acceptance should be that we accept these breaches from happening. I think these companies should be held liable for when there's gross negligence in place where they're not securing their systems appropriately. And it's not to say that every company can be 100% secure. That's not possible. And there are lapses in security. I'm talking gross negligence where a company just isn't focusing on protecting their customer data or protecting the information of others. That's really where I have a big problem, where there's a lot of companies out there that just don't do that or don't put the controls in place. And in those types of cases, they should be held, liable for the damages and repercussions that occurs to that individual. And it's not just, fraud monitoring services. It's, how do you, once that information is stolen, how do you put a monetary value to that stolen information long-term? And that's really difficult to do.
Speaking of money, we've got to talk about SolarWinds, because it's, as you said, probably one of the biggest attacks, hopefully of our lifetime. Hopefully it's not going to get bigger than that. And obviously this provided a lot of excitement just before Christmas. And I would say, and I don't know whether you found the same thing, the response from the community was a little bit mixed. And I think some people were very cautious about hanging them out to dry initially, and some people wanted blood straight away.
Yeah.
So where did you kind of sit in that, and what did you sort of take away from it in terms of sort of responsibility, I suppose?
Yeah, whenever there's a big data breach that happens, you get kind of both sides of the spectrum, right? Folks that are like, we need to burn that company down because they experienced data breach. And other ones that are like, hey, I've worked in a corporation, like stuff like this happens, and so you have the differences of those types of things. I would say I was pretty middle ground. I think my biggest, breaches can happen to any organization. And when you're getting targeted by a nation state, which in this case, it's allegedly Russia, that is a very difficult thing to protect against. I mean, they're methodical, they have unlimited resources, time and money. The sophistication level is the highest it can possibly be. There's a lot of ins and outs that really make this one, truly a unique case. At the same time, I was very disappointed with how SolarWinds handled their communications.
Hmm.
And that's one thing that you continuously see when organizations are either kind of the hero, the heroine on this specific area, or the villain, I guess I should say, is when they don't communicate well.
Hmm.
And when they're not transparent, they're not letting their customers know what they can do, not giving them any hope of what's occurring. I understand that when you're dealing with incident response scenarios, it takes time to paint the full picture. But it's one of those things where you need to be fully transparent of things. Their response back was, we have an ongoing investigation. We're working with secret services. Good luck. That was basically the response back. Like, that is not a response that you give to your customers that have just been literally owned because of your software, right? You have to be out there on the news saying, I'm so sorry. We're figuring this out. I'm going to get down to the bottom of this. I can assure you that it's been fixed currently today. As I get the information, I'm going to go out there. I mean, the CEO should have been literally on every single news organization talking about it.
Yeah.
And instead, it was very tight-lipped. We had to rely off of third parties like Microsoft and FireEye to publish data that was, circumstantial, because it was piecing together things that were occurring and not getting it where the direct source was. So I think FireEye really mishandled the communication aspects of things. And I think that was really poorly done. And we still don't really know what the level of access was. Just as of today, or sorry, as of 2 days ago, SolarWinds said the initial entry point was in the Microsoft environment, through the Microsoft environment, of how the Russians got in. And Microsoft just came back 12 hours ago and said that is completely false. That never happened at all. So we still don't know what is going on. Like, we don't know
Right.
what happened, how they got in. Do they still have access? We know nothing. So, it's, and again, I understand incident response takes a long time, but I think from my perspective, I think, I'm sympathetic to SolarWinds because it could happen to anybody. At the same time, their incident response process in the corporate communications to the public was just absolutely a disaster.
Yeah. And I think, that's the funny thing that strikes me as so odd in so many breaches. But actually, it's okay to say, we don't know what's going on yet. We're figuring it out. We'll let you know.
Yeah.
We'll keep you
Yeah,
updated. That's fine. No one
absolutely.
expects you to come out with the answer straight away. But yet, what seems to be this temptation is you see people saying, oh, well, it's happened to loads of people. Oh, it was definitely a nation state. Oh, it was, we're sort of dealing with it. We'll let you know. And then this vacuum exists that people then start kind of piecing things together and coming up with their own conclusions.
Exactly.
And that conclusion could work in your favor, but probably it's not going to work in your favor, because if it works in your favor, it's not selling newspapers.
Another great example, another really quick example of that is Microsoft actually did a fairly decent job, but then kind of slipped. So Microsoft came out and said, we identified the specific attack. They had no access to any of our systems whatsoever. We're confident in that. Is the sales/press release marketing campaign that came out. So everybody felt confident that, hey, Microsoft wasn't owned in this specific area. And then you had a Reuters article come out, about 2 weeks later that said, no, Microsoft was directly compromised, and the attackers had access to their infrastructure. Now, when but they don't know the level of extent of that. So it could be just a little bit, it could be a lot. But when you say you had direct access to Microsoft's internal infrastructure and source code, all of a sudden now it's like this is world alarming stuff. Like, this is like the foundation of what the world runs off of, literally, as Microsoft, right? And now all of a sudden we have a Reuters article that's coming out and saying, well, they were owned. And then you have Microsoft statement saying, no, we weren't owned. And then their press person comes out and says, listen, this Reuters article is completely false. We didn't get owned. And then 2 weeks later they came out and said, okay, well, we got owned, but it was a little bit, so it's all over the place of what actually happened, because again, the communication is just poor. And what Microsoft should come out and say is, listen, there's no indication that they had access to a substantial amount of information. We did identify compromised instances here, which they did to some extent say, but we have an ongoing investigation to evaluate and analyze all this. We'll keep you posted as things go along, right? And should have been updated as things went along. But instead it creates all this crazy pandemonium. And I mean, like, every news organization was lighting up with Microsoft attacked. Well, what we know today, they had access to some source code, that wasn't, core operating system stuff, and, some potentially internal systems, but it wasn't anything major. And so it didn't seem to be a major data breach, but it's still, fairly scary. But again, communication, key piece in that.
Yeah. And you see this with paying of ransoms as well, I think, where they're like, we're not paying the ransom, we're not paying the ransom, we're not paying the ransom. And then no more comment about paying the ransom. And then it
Yeah.
transpires that you've paid the ransom. And
I
it's
still can't
like,
figure out, did Garmin pay the ransom?
yeah,
Because
I'm not sure actually. I think I read that people thought they had, but I'm not sure that's actually
they never
been
came out with a statement.
proved.
Yeah, they never came out with a statement of like, so like they were like, all of our systems are down. They're like, we got hit by ransomware, and then you never heard a blip from them again. It was like, then all of a sudden their systems were up, and they were asking $50 million, and all of a sudden now it's like, well, did they pay it or not? Everybody's like, well, they probably paid it, but no one knows.
Yeah. And I think that flip-flopping does not work in your favor, certainly
Yeah.
not with the security community, because I think that's kind of like a call to action for people to go and crucify you, because you don't look very trustworthy at all, do we?
Yep. I mean, I think what that shows is an immaturity in your incident response process too, right? You know, as part of incident response is tabletop exercises of near, you know, crisis situations that are going to happen in your environment, and how do you work with legal? How do you work with corporate communications? What do you communicate out? You know, this should be a regular cycle that you go through on a regular basis. And I'm not saying you could have predicted, you know, so I don't think SolarWinds couldn't have predicted, hey, Russia's going to hack us in 2019 and backdoor our source code is going to push an update out. But the type of responses and how do you communicate to people on the outside, and how do you handle that from a PR perspective? You know, those are all things that you want to have established up front, not after the fact. So I think it shows immaturity in the security program, you know, from their specific sides of not being able to adequately address those types of things and to even show communication. I think that's why it kind of makes the security industry so mad, is because, like, you know, those are things you should be doing as a general practice, not after the fact of something that after it occurs. So, you know, there's things of kind of balancing that and getting better at it before those things occur.
Right. And that's actually, as a consultant, that's something I do. I do run these tabletop exercises. And what I
So
also
valuable.
find,
Yeah.
they're great fun. And I always say it's a really safe place to practice your responses, where there aren't really press looking at you and no one's looking at you, and it's fine. You can make as many mistakes as you want. But one thing I find really interesting, especially when it comes to regulators, financial regulators, or the Information Commissioner's Office here in the UK, is that often companies are trying to work out whether they can get around not telling them, and whether they can just forget about it.
Yeah.
And, oh, well, technically we don't know the data's stolen, so the time isn't really running.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite.
And it's like, but you suspect it is. And, you know, really it would look better if you were just, you know, totally transparent. But for some reason, and maybe it's this kind of naughty kid thing where we were used to, when we were children, we'd break a vase or something that our mum owned and we'd try and hide it so it looked like it was our brother or sister. You know, maybe it's just an extension of that behavior. But it just seems so bizarre, where they're working with their lawyers and spending all this time trying to work out how far we can push that back before we actually have to say we knew.
Yep. We see that as a common practice, and like, taking SolarWinds as an example, you know, you have to go back 6 to 8 months to figure out whether or not you were even compromised, and most people can't go back that far to piece together that type of attack. Now, so do you say you're compromised? Do you say you're not compromised? I mean, it's such a dilemma that you have to deal with, and a lot of these companies, as you mentioned, really, you know, are like, well, we don't have 100% solid concrete evidence that we were compromised, but all the evidence is kind of pointing to we were, but it's not 100%, so we're not going to say anything. You know, and that's a very, you know, big ethical issue that we run into, and again, that might come down to legislature from the fact that if you cannot conclusively, with 100% reasonable doubt, say that information wasn't compromised, then you need to disclose it. I mean, I think that's probably the only way that we're going to fix that solution, and actually get change in that specific area, because, you know, a company's going to err on the side of what's going to cost or cause us a less amount of pain.
Yeah.
And even if our customer data was stolen, hey, we're not sure it was stolen, so, you know, good luck. And that's basically where we're at now.
Well, I could talk about this for a long time, and I actually have so many more questions, but unfortunately we have run out of time, because this will be like a 10-hour episode otherwise, which I'm sure no one would want to sit through 10 hours of supply chain analysis. But where can people go to follow you and keep up to date with what you're doing and anything else that's coming out of Trusted Sec and other stuff?
Yeah, so trustedsec.com, my other company, binarydefense.com, and Hacking Dave on Twitter. Those are kind of the three main areas that I'm usually on, and happy to respond or answer questions or things to that effect. You know, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm a very timid person, love responding back to folks if they have questions. So if you ever need anything, that's what I'm here for. Happy to help out.
Thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And to all our viewers, thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe and like. We'll see you next episode.
Thank you.